Hey dude, it's Alex. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This is via the sat phone. Just thought I'd check in, see what you guys are up to. I know you're probably busy going around, but I think tomorrow's our last full day, so we're out on the 15th, so we'll see you guys up in Bigfoot Art Gallery. But yeah, it's been pretty awesome out here. Some weird activity for sure. Like last night we had running around our camp and throwing stuff and shit into the water. It was definitely weird. Definitely some crazy stuff out here, but yeah, man, we'll tell you all about it when we're back. Just thought I'd check in. See you soon.
I brought you guys out here, and the location's a mile and a half in. But if we wouldn't have made that left in the road up here, and we would have continued going straight through that gate, that goes out to gas lease property now. Before you get in there, there's some trails. I've been stalked by bears out here, and you don't know they're there. Never smelled them. If the wind direction is right, you can smell something, and it's usually a musty smell. If you go down here, it veers off, but there's a trail that goes to the right. And you just go along, and it leads to, there's some lakes down there, and there's, believe it or not, somebody's got a cabin way down there. This is probably the least traveled path that veers off to the right. If you go to the left, there's a lot of people who go that way, but going to the right, it's kind of crappy. We were moose hunting, and I was probably going 2-3 miles an hour. And we see this big bull moose just kind of charge out in front of us, and it kind of speeds up, but it just kind of was doing its own thing, and it crosses, and he literally ran through there and went into the tree line, kind of like right here, and just stopped. The moose is basically to the left-hand side. I hear something off the right-hand side, and it sounded like a branch breaking or leaves. Didn't pay attention to it. What got me was the moose paid more attention to that noise, or from the direction that noise came from, than us. Turned its whole body so it could look towards it. And I'm like thinking, bear, maybe another moose, you know, something. And he was no longer interested in the two of us that are probably 60, 80 feet away from him. And literally to the right, it was probably another 60 to 80, maybe 90 feet tops into this tree line where this noise came from. And I turn the gun and look over there, thinking it's some type of predator, expecting to see a bear. Generally you smell the bears if the wind direction's right. We didn't smell anything, and literally I took and aimed the rifle, and I'm looking at kind of a dark silhouette. Can't really tell what it is. I asked my brother-in-law he had brought out a spotlight. I take the flashlight, shine it over here, and when I finally lit up what I can only assume is the face, and I got just these big eyes, and then like the top of the nose part, and that was it. But it was a bright orange to a red in color, and it kind of freaked me out, because I'm going, what can it be? All these animals that I know of in the area, and the eye color is what got me. And I have the scope aimed at this thing, right between the eyes.
I want to take a second to thank Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video. You see, up until recently, I was being charged $30 a month for a subscription I didn't even know I had. And that's when Rocket Money comes into the picture. You see, Rocket Money is the app you need to save and manage your money better. I love Rocket Money because I'm able to cancel unwanted subscriptions. You see, Rocket Money goes in and safely and securely identifies recurring charges. And from there, it can cancel unwanted subscriptions for me, saving me time and money. On top of that, it analyzes your spending habits and can create custom budgets that match your lifestyle, even going so far as to notify you when you've exceeded your budgetary limit. To save more and spend less, join the 5 million other members using Rocket Money today. Just go to rocketmoney.com/smalltownmonsters or click the link in the description to get started for free.
It had to have been squatting down, because it was like one fluid motion where it just literally rose up, like just kind of took and just raised like straight up. when it rose up, it went up, I don't know, it had to go up at least another 3 feet. So the 9-10 foot area had to been. I don't even remember thinking about it. I just followed it up with the rifle, and I'm still got it between the eyes. And I'm thinking about pulling the trigger, but I hesitated because I don't know what it is. And I go, Jesse, did you see that? And he goes, yeah. He whispers, but he was to the left of me. I look left, he's not there. Look to the right, he's halfway back to the pickup truck. I took and backed up till I hit my tailgate of my pickup truck, and then I turned around. But I never saw this thing come out of the woods. I didn't hear any noises after that. I didn't hear any noises when it raised up. But I've seen bears, probably half a dozen bears, raise up on their back quarters, and it's a very awkward motion, and this thing was fluid. So Bigfoot's the only thing that I really can ever relate it to. I never would have known it was there if that moose didn't do anything.
Yeah, and you said you haven't really gone back out since then, right?
No, this is the second time I've even been out here since 2009. I brought my wife in 2016 and drove out there in a pickup truck to where the location was. But I haven't been hunting since. I mean, granted, part of it's my schedule, but I don't know, I'm not going by myself. I'll go with a buddy if, but it was awkward because it's like admitting that it's real, and that's the only thing it could have been. It's I don't know, it was kind of a game changer.
Where do you go when you want to be alone? It's a common thing for human beings to need time away from it all, away from the grind of their day jobs, or away from their ordinary but chaotic lives. People need an escape. Each year, around 250 million people choose to escape into our national parks. They head to Yellowstone or Yosemite, or they backpack their way around Zion. In short, they go into the woods and mountains, just like John Muir once did. But even in the backcountry of our nation, the odds of ever being really, truly alone are slim. There are a few truly remote places you can trek to. The 100-mile wilderness in Maine, or the Hoh Rainforest in the Olympic National Park. There's even a town in Montana called Glasgow that sits over 4 hours in any direction from a major city. Journey into the mountains of the Adirondacks in upstate New York and you'll still see plains overhead, bump into numerous hikers, and encounter your fair share of roads to cross. Likewise with most places I've been while exploring the subject of Bigfoot. But then there's Alaska. It's 663,300 square miles of isolation. 663,300 square miles of mountains and rivers, hills and valleys, forests, and fields. It is the wilderness of America. It's here that the search for Sasquatch becomes incredibly complicated. A land overflowing with wildlife and abundant beauty. A place that calls to millions of travelers each year. They come to explore, to gawk, to eat, drink, and maybe to get a sense of what life was once like before mankind inherited the earth. The real reason they come here, though, is quite simple. It's to escape. A land with over 200 million acres of nationally protected wilderness is the perfect place to stay hidden. For an unknown creature that seems to enjoy its solitude, it seems like Alaska might be the perfect place to finally put an end to the Bigfoot mystery, to bring the myth out of darkness and into the light. But in a place where there are expanses of uninhabited land that runs for hundreds of miles in any direction, aren't we just searching for a slightly larger than average needle in the world's largest haystack?
What is it about that environment and the geography and everything there that might be conducive to something like a Bigfoot?
Alaska is unlike anything we find in the lower 48s. It is huge. People just do not realize the expansive wilderness that is up there. I mean, you can of course juxtapose the state of Alaska over the United States and see how big it is, but you just don't really get the feel for it until you put your boots on the ground up there. It is just ridiculous.
The last frontier is the least explored. It's like the American dream, I guess. It's the last blank space on the map. It's the proximity of the wilderness to civilization there is kind of mind-blowing. You go 10 minutes outside of Anchorage and you're out there. You're seeing moose on the side of the road. You know, there's moose in downtown Anchorage sometimes. It's not conquered, if you will. It hasn't been dominated by human technology and civilization yet. And maybe it'll stay that way, I don't know.
I've always wanted to come to Alaska. And so I just had a sighting last year, so I'm kind of fully in the camp of the realness. So now I just want to learn more about them, and especially like in a place like this, how they live and exist, and learn about encounters.
Yeah, Alaska is interesting because it has all sorts of climates and bioclimes, environments. This particular area is boreal forest, but it's bordering on tundra. Boreal forest has white spruce, black spruce. They're all pretty stunty. A big tree here is maybe 50 feet. The ground tends to be very mossy, very soft, so it doesn't show distinct tracks very often. The climate is mild in the summer. 72 degrees is a really hot day here. Winters are harsh, and that's why this enigma is so baffling. You can get minus 20 and below for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Something that's just depending on hair, it's a tough environment. We do have wolves here as a predator that stays out in the winter, but the bears hibernate, of course. As far as food, we've got berries, we've got doll sheep, we've got moose, we've got caribou, hares, different types of grouse and ptarmigan. In the summer, it's not so hard to explain Sasquatch here. but it is hard to explain it in the winter. Also, there's snow everywhere, so where are the tracks? You know, we occasionally get reports of tracks, but it's pretty rare.
The Bigfoot subject is one that I can't get out of my head. It's just something that I've been up here for so long now, and I've seen a lot of big animals, a lot of big creatures. Big grizzlies, big eagles, everything. And they're powerful, and up close, they're just incredibly phenomenal. But when you see something big and incredible that you can't explain and you can't get out of your mind, and it raises all the fear, flight, and flight senses. And when I first seen mine, I almost hit the brakes at 75 miles an hour. And it was all in a matter of seconds, because I was traveling, heading east on the highway on the right-hand side, and this creature was all the way over, the lane over, into the ditch. Now, when I first seen it, it was broad, like I said, it's about 7 o'clock in the evening, so we had plenty of light during the summer. I seen it off the distance, and I thought it was a large Shetland-type pony with long hair, and then I figured it must have been an Icelandic, like an Icelandic pony. And it was like real dreadlocked. It was long, streamy hair. It was ochre, real dark red ochre. Now this thing was built. You could just see the pumped belly on it, the arms, and the length of the arms. I could see through underneath the belly of this creature, where the hair still had plenty of distance between that and the ground. Now, this is all I seen as I was driving by at 75 miles an hour. I immediately looked into the rear view mirror and to see if I could get a clearer picture of what I'd just seen. And it was right in the middle of the highway. It had jumped in less than it's about a second and a half. It had jumped all the way from about, I'd say 40 feet down into a ditch, up onto the center line, and was completely profile looking down the highway. When I first seen this thing, it was looking down towards the ground and away from the road, and I could not see the head. But where the horse's head was supposed to be was not. It was just bulky and thick and looking down. I said, well, I never thought for a second it was a bear. It was too big. And then I looked back into the mirror and I was watching it. For that very second, it was perfectly profiled. There must have been at least 24 inches between the dread of the hairs and the space of the road, because I could see clearly down the road. And it was looking down the highway from whence we came. There was no traffic on the road either way, forward or backwards. As soon as I seen it in the highway, that's when I reached up and grabbed my foot and I was ready to, and I busted brake pedals before stopping fast. And I took my foot off and looked back again, and this thing was descending down the bank on the other side. Its rump raised up in the air, its back legs up high, and its lower legs down this way. Never at any time did I see it on 4 legs. And I didn't see the face. But this was real. So, how do you get something like that out of your mind? I was ready to chase it down. I was young enough to do it. I'd been guiding and commercial fishing and just running amok with horses and animals all my life. I was ready to chase this thing down, and I know the trail.
If you could relive that moment, what would you do different?
I would have hit the brakes and turned around and chased it down. So, but this was a creature. And it was, like I said, I've been up here for 49 years, and I spent most of my time around what life there is up here. And I don't expect to ever see something like that again. But who knows?
In terms of pluses and minuses of something like Sasquatch being discovered in Alaska, I think it just makes sense. I think most people probably wouldn't be surprised because Alaska has that reputation, that mystique as that final frontier. It's a place where so many people, especially from the lower 48, go up there, and it has like a special place in their minds. People go there to escape. It's that kind of, it's the last stop on the road sort of thing. So I think people wouldn't be surprised by something like Sasquatch being in a place like Alaska. Many people I've talked to that are, you know, not into the topic of Sasquatch, oh yeah, Alaska, that's where they'd be, sort of thing.
Sasquatches, being omnivores, have their pick of what they want to eat, essentially. The salmon runs are still largely unspoilt up there, so like literally upstream, there's going to be dead salmon laying on the side of streams. The grizzly bears, of course, are catching them, and Sasquatches may very well do that as well. Look at the diet of the big brown bears. The diets of those bears are sure largely fish dependent and things, but they have a huge variety of plants that they eat as well.
From the Kenai Peninsula, even Kodiak Islands, that whole area, down up into Canada, Southeast Alaska, some of the richest environments in the world in terms of temperate rainforest. Absolutely perfect places for something like a Sasquatch to live. And in parts of the interior, there are great habitats as well.
Areas like Fairbanks, interior Alaska, it gets incredibly cold, 40, 50 below. It's really hard to imagine anything surviving out there, let alone a Sasquatch. Southeast Juneau, Ketchikan, even where my buddy's cabin is outside of Seward, the environment is a lot more rainforesty. You'll recognize right away when you go into these areas, wow, and they're secluded. The temperatures are more mild, you know, and we're not talking like interior Fairbanks weather. Juneau is definitely more mild, so I think that plays a lot to do with it, it seems. And like I said, these places seem to, you know, the fish are available. It's kind of like a grizzly bear versus a brown bear.
Kind of an analogy between grizzly bears and brown bears. So brown bears live very close to the coast. So their diet is very rich because they have terrestrial food sources and aquatic food sources, right? So they have access to salmon, fish. We know fish oil and that sort of stuff is extremely healthy for animals, especially carnivores. So brown bears grow bigger than grizzly bears. Grizzly bears live inland. They have to fight a little bit more for their food sources, so that's why they're called grizzly.
I think it's kind of like that. I think it is similar to, I could see how they would hang out in a more mild area versus up north or, you know, Barrow or something that's just frozen all the time. Although I've heard stories from there.
So I thought, well, maybe is it a similar case with a Sasquatch? You know, if you lived in a peninsula like the Kenai Peninsula, essentially in one of these coves, you don't have to go anywhere. You can stay there the whole time and you've got all your food sources in the water and on land. Whereas inland, you know, you may have to move a little, you may have to follow the caribou herds, or you may have to, you know, follow the other food sources. A little bit more, it just seemed like a more difficult existence.
If you look at other predator behavior, I have no reason to believe Sasquatch would not follow those same types of behavior. I do believe that Bigfoot are omnivorous, so they probably are opportunistic eaters. Most of the accounts that I am aware of, both historically and in more recent times, are around September and August, which is when berries are out and caribou are migrating, especially in the far north above the Arctic Circle. So I definitely believe that Sasquatch tend to follow caribou herds for food, and I think they're also in those same areas because that's also where there's a lot of berries, blueberries, high bush cranberries, things that are going to be highly nutritious and fattening up, just like bears would that time of year for winter when things are lean.
I mean, obviously, Alaska is not a friendly environment for anything, for anyone, for anything. It's very cruel and can be very cruel. And so there have been sightings that I've discovered in my research as far north as Barrow, and then there's others in the interior, farther up around Fairbanks. But it seems to me they move more in the interior in better weather. One thing I've kind of been examining that I've talked to other researchers about is we've discussed, like, you know, the possibility of hibernation or modified hibernation. That's one thing I really looked into. And matter of fact, the University of Alaska Fairbanks had a program they were working on with trying to figure out induced hibernation for like deep space travel. They were actively working on that up there, and I think they still are to some extent. Would it be so far-fetched to believe that maybe a being like this could have developed the ability through necessity, especially in the interior regions, to do that you know, that modified hibernation, not full-blown hibernation, but maybe a modified where they get up and move around limited areas, do what they need to do, gather food sources and stuff like that.
Just this past March, my wife and me and another older gentleman, but we were looking for new places to ice fish because, you know, that's what you do here, is you go ice fishing. And my wife is ungodly slow on a snow machine, like crazy, crazy, crazy slow. So it's common to have to sit and wait, and that's what I do. I was just chilling, having a smoke, and I'm looking down the trail, hoping I get to see her, you know, because then I get to go. And I couldn't believe what it was a Bigfoot, and then a junior right next to him, and it was like he was helping him across the road. And I'm by myself in just a birch forest. And about that time, two more come out, and they're a little bigger than the kid that the first two was. They must have heard me. I don't understand. But one of them stood up and, like, kind of like a bear, started kind of bird dogging, you know, kind of trying to look down the trail. I had this, like, instant fear, like I was about to die. And yeah, it was crazy.
Did they walk off, or what happened with them?
The one that stood up on me followed me. But he was like following me, like, it was weird.
Did there come a point where it just quit following you, or?
Yeah, when I started talking to my old lady about it. I'm sorry, sweetie.
What did they look like? What did the little ones look like?
He didn't look like Harry and the Hendersons. He didn't have hair on his face. It was more of a leathery, big palm, almost look to it.
How big do you think it was?
It was the big one. I don't think he was no 10 foot tall or anything. He just looked like a big man. The little fella, he probably was the little guy, no bigger than that right there. So the big guy might have been just normal human. Now the other two they looked like they were teenagers, like they were romping around, getting in trouble. I don't know. Like he seemed young, but not young. So, I'm not crazy. I'm a normal. Okay, so, he had a flat nose. It wasn't like, it wasn't like a big old pronounced nose, I didn't believe in Bigfoot. Never really thought twice about believing him. And here I am now describing what Bigfoot looks like, so I'm feeling humiliated.
Don't feel humiliated.
Despite spending countless hours reading books and watching documentaries on the state of Alaska as a kid, I'd somehow never realized that Alaska is broken up into 5 distinct regions. The uniting factor between all these regions are the native peoples who have lived here for centuries. The Inside Passage is the southeastern portion of the coastal area of the state and is home to the city of Juneau. The far north of Alaska is also better known as the Arctic. Sparsely populated and wild, the Arctic is more acquainted with caribou than it is human beings. Nome is the only major city in this region of the state. To its south lies interior Alaska. The centerpiece of the state is Denali, formerly known as Mount McKinley. Denali is North America's tallest mountain. Interior Alaska is a nature lover's dream. Millions of acres of nationally protected wild land to find what is arguably the most beautiful part of the state. To the north of Inside Passage lies the South Central region, which is where the state capital of Anchorage is housed. To the west of Anchorage lies the Southwest region. This is one of the most rugged portions of Alaska, a region with sprawling coastlines, rugged mountains, and almost innumerable moose, brown bear, and salmon. The southwestern region is also known for the Aleutian Islands, a chain of 14 volcanic and 55 smaller islands, which form the northernmost part of the Pacific Ring of Fire. Undergrowth can be thick in some places, but the Aleutians are largely known for their rocky, jagged peaks and their tundras. Here, in the unfriendly environments of western Alaska, the Altuit tribes settled and hunted sea mammals from skin-covered boats. Today, many tribes still call the region home. It's far from prime Bigfoot habitat, yet despite its appearance, it is here that one of the most believable and incredible eyewitness stories I came across during our Alaska trip originated. Elizabeth was a young wife and mother in 1969 when she came face to face with a creature late one night while staying at a friend's house.
I want to tell it before I get too old and forget, you know? I don't think I'll ever forget that though. Yeah. Because it froze me. Oh, okay, when we moved down there, it was in Alaska. Okay, you know where that's down on the chain. Okay, there's no trees around there or anything. And this lady, she always left food out for it because it would come at night and look for food, I guess. And but I guess she's seen it before. Nobody would go out berry picking because they're afraid of seeing that thing because it was around town. Several people seen it looking down at them when they took the garbage out to the dump. The dogs always got scared of it, but I'll never forget that.
You said berries? The people were scared to go out berry picking?
Berry picking, there's a lot of berries, wild berries down there, and no one would go out berry picking because they knew that that outside man, they call him, was around. And they always said he was over 8 foot tall. And he was probably 8 and a few inches maybe. And all the kids went up to her place to spend the night because our husbands went out crab fishing. And, but that night, when we heard that noise out there, we looked out and I didn't even sit down in my chair yet, and I was about 6 feet away from it. And I looked up, something made me look up, and it was above the window because the windows were high. It was windy down there, and they had, you know, high windows so the wind don't break. And I looked up, and that thing was above the window and looking down like this at me, and its eyes was big, and its skin was dark brown and shiny, weather beaten. And so was his eyes. His eyes were all red, you know, from being out in the weather.
Hear any sound? Was there any sound, even though it was on the other side of the wall? Did it make any noise?
Yeah, that's what drew us to look outside. It made some kind of noise, and it was all quiet outside because everybody was sleeping, and the bar was closed. We could see the bar lights from where she lived, and everybody was gone from there, and it was very quiet. And then we heard this sound like there was a baby out there, and it did make a loud enough for us to hear through the walls.
When he was standing and leaning down, was he,
No hands, just his big, wide chest, gee, that big on top. And a big head, I mean, a little bigger than ours, and hairy, dark hair. But the skin was so dark, weather-beaten, and it shine, you know, and its eyes. Those are the reddest bloodshot eyes I've ever seen in my life. And it stood there and looked at us for a while, looked at her and then looked at me, and I just couldn't get my eyes away from it. And she was wondering what I was looking at, because my face, I'm in horror. And she looked up and she was right under it, and she made out a blood-curdling scream. That's what brought me to. Oh my goodness, that thing. And there was all kinds of windows in that front window, and we were afraid it would break in, and so we had to move all the kids. She had 4 and I had 4 into the bedroom where there was no window, so it wouldn't break through. And we knocked on the wall to have our friend come over to help us see what that was, and he was too scared. He knew what it was, and he wouldn't go out the door for nothing. He went and hid himself. And it didn't do anything. Very good. It was very calm. We thought it would be breaking in and everything, the door, and it just looked at us and then backed off and walked off into the mountains again. That's the last we've seen of it.
Was the face that you saw, would you say it was like a primate, like a gorilla or an ape? Or
yeah, like that, but more or less more humanized than an ape, you know. You knew it wasn't an ape, and the apes aren't that tall anyway. Because he had bent over looking down on us. But I never, ever want to see it again in my whole life. It's so real. It's just horrifying.
You said that, like, natives see this stuff all the time. You don't really pay any attention to it.
Yeah.
Like,
all the time.
Really?
You talked to my cousin Elizabeth, right? I mean, her occurrence happened in 1967 on Alaska. And oh geez, imagine one of these things mimicking a baby to draw out a woman preying against her natural instincts is just cunning on a level I just can't.
What you think it was doing then? It was like.
What? It didn't offer her any berries or anything. What was that's the unknown. What was the purpose of that? You know, what would be the point of luring them out, especially mimicking a baby they know? That's.
Is there historical precedence for that? Like these things trying to.
Well, yeah, our oral history, like in Kalignik, there's part of their oral history is they caught. Kaligniks had 3 villages. The first one is where this happened. They had to move it because of an ice dam on the river. So before that happened, what are we talking, like 100 and some years ago? Supposedly they caught a hairy man, dug a big pit. It was a smaller hairy man, a younger one, put it in the pit and were feeding it for 4 days. And on the morning of like the 5th day, they heard a "help, I'm cold" in Yupik. And they look into the pit and it's a woman that had been missing for a couple years. So what do you do with that? You know what I mean? Like, and it's their oral history. You know, you can't just go and sit there and disrespect them and say, nah, that didn't happen like that. You know what I mean? So you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt, and maybe there's a life lesson in it, but I don't know.
My personal opinion is, I think, as far as native legends and lore across the spectrum, not just here in Alaska, but I really think that the key to recognition of this being, species, whatever you might want to call it, is through the native tribes and affiliations. I think that's the key, because they recognize these beings as part of their culture, and in many of the cultures they recognize it as being a part of their even religious aspects of their culture. But the problem is trying to get them to talk to people about it. Because historically well, you know, the Bigfoot question historically has been met with a lot of ridicule, sarcasm, whatever you want to call it. Mainstream science will never, in my opinion, admit to it, not in our lifetimes. But the Native Americans, even here in Alaska, you can look across all of their cultures, and they have stories, and they have history, you know, something that we have seemed to neglect on the topic.
I've had some natives, Alaska natives, come in. One lady in particular, she's come in here a couple times with her son, and she's from up north. And she told me that when she was a little girl in the bush, she said their grandma used to tell them when they'd go berry picking not to go to the whistles. I don't know if that's a luring, it seems like a luring behavior, or why the elders say don't go to it. There's a reason why you don't go to it. But I've heard that from several natives from up north. So I think it's interesting. I think that tells a little bit. You know, I wouldn't trust them myself. I wouldn't.
Were there warnings or anything about going out in the woods or?
Oh yeah, don't whistle in the woods. Don't turn your back on the woods. Don't go out alone. Behave, or otherwise they'll snatch you and eat you. You know, but it always involved snatching you and eating you. There was never any, oh, they'll make you one of them, or, you know, this kind of thing. It was all bad. And when I was a little kid, I used to chalk it up to, oh, they're trying to keep us out of the woods. I was a smart boy, you know.
I have not had much opportunity to interact with the indigenous people up further north in Alaska, but I have had interactions with people in Prince of Wales Island and that general area. There's a couple different stories. One is of the otter man. They say Kushtaka is the otter man, but I personally kind of think that's a Bigfoot. Sasquatches are well known to be swimming between the islands in southeast Alaska. In Dr. Robert Alley's book, Coastal Sasquatch, he details several reports from the local fishermen seeing what they initially thought was a log floating in the water, but then it went under and frogs stroked away. I mean, you know. So we know they swim between the islands. Not only have they been seen doing it, but they're on the islands, and the islands aren't large enough to hold a breeding population. I think the otter man in the local indigenous culture, I think that is actually a Sasquatch, because otters swim really well, Sasquatches swim really well. Man, well, Sasquatches are man-shaped, covered in hair. Why wouldn't the otter man just be a Sasquatch?
In the 1940s, there was a gal named Emily Supnich who wrote to Roger Patterson about an encounter her mother had outside the village of Kaluka. Her mother and some friends were out berry picking, and they came across this tall, long, black-haired creature. And apparently some of the village men caught it and caged it, and they tried to feed it fish for a while, but it started to get sick and its hair started to fall out, and they realized it was a female because it had breasts. Eventually it died in captivity. I found that very intriguing.
So what do you call Bigfoot? What do they, you know?
Hairy man, Chikyle.
Yeah.
There's other words that are just too throaty. You know, one of the reasons I started coming forward to share is the lower 48 is totally different than up here, obviously. You know, and I was hearing a lot of these fanciful things about people basically having them as friends and family groups for a dozen years, and, you know, 8, and they know all their names and stuff, and I'm like, I don't see that. I've never seen anything friendly. 1995, we were walking up this meadow, we were looking for ptarmigan. It's basically swampy tundra, and then you got black spruce, little islands of it. Well, we're walking up, and it wasn't a marshy part, but as we're coming up, we hear this grunt off to the side of us, and as we look over, man, it gives me a chill. This thing stood up and then ran away from us, right? It was about 7 foot tall, kind of like I would call it like a cinnamon kind of brownish color, not very long hair, probably about 4 to 6 inches. Had longer hair right here, but as far as the face, all you could make out was just kind of like a little glint from the eyes. It was kind of in the shade of the trees, so when it stood up, it was more silhouetted than anything, and then when it cleared running away on the back side of that, then you saw its coloration a little better. And so initially we're like, well, that was weird. And then it started throwing stuff, so we started leaving the area, and as we're leaving the area, all it was doing was breaking trees. It was taking birch about that big around, just snapping it. Like, that didn't seem too friendly. Now, it's easy to, you know, 20/20 hindsight and say it was aggressive, but it could have just been running us out of its berry picking patch.
Nearly 30 peoples make up the native culture that has helped to define Bigfoot in the state. Legends exist across tribes, many of them recounting descriptions and behaviors that sound similar to the lower 48 zone Sasquatch legends. Many of them, however, seem to hint at something darker. A more sinister undertone overtakes many of the tales and folklore that permeate this part of the country, and it's something that I'll have to explore later. Here in Alaska, the creatures have moved across the state, crossing lines between cultural icon and a natural part of the ecosystem. It all depends on your view of the world around you. One thing that strikes me about Elizabeth's story of the Bigfoot is the way it made her feel, even at the time when it happened. Elizabeth, like most witnesses, has spent most of her life in this place. She was familiar with the local wildlife, and yet, when she encountered the Sasquatch staring in her window, she was left shaken and disturbed. This is a creature that seems right at home in its native environment, and yet, despite being here for centuries, when a person encounters one, they can hardly process it. Almost as if the creature has altered the way in which we see the places we once considered our domain, or simply our home. The Bigfoot doesn't just appear and disappear without a trace. It leaves behind a shattered perception of what the witness once thought they knew about their environment itself. In many cases, it leaves the witness feeling like an intruder in a world they no longer understand, even if that world is one settled by your ancestors over hundreds, if not thousands of years.
I'm assuming Bigfoot, Sasquatch, might have been part of your culture.
We have something called Inyokun. It's like a spirit, but it's physical. It's kind of like a Bigfoot. Maybe it is a Bigfoot, who knows? But it can disappear. It can take you. I don't know where they take you. I mean, it'll leave tracks and do things, and they're big like that. So the first time I saw one coming back from Denali, well, you come around this big corner, and there's so much space in between the roads on each side where there's nothing but grass. There's no hills, there's no nothing. And so there's this little patch of trees, and you can see through the trees. So I saw this big thing come walking towards the trees. And I'm thinking, that's a Inyokun. And it didn't have time to get around past that tree line, cross that big field, and it didn't have that much time to get all the way around there when I was coming around. But when I went all the way around, I was still looking for it, and I didn't see it. It was huge. I mean, it was way out there, but I could tell there was somebody walking out there like an Inyokun.
Can you describe it, like what it physically?
They're big, they're dark, like black. They are hairy, but I think they're a little bit skinnier. It only took me 10 years to realize the first thing that I saw was a Bigfoot. Later that winter, that same trail, but the snow is high on each side. So we're coming back, and it was getting late. Well, there was a white, I look into that valley every time we go through there. And this time when I finally looked right as we were passing, I seen it sitting there watching us pass. It had a big shoulder, a big head, and another shoulder, and it was sitting on this, there's a big stump in one of the valleys. It's sitting on this stump, and it's just sitting there watching us. So I was like, turn around, you know, go back. And then we go back, and by the time there's nothing there, there's just this big void. And the snow is deep, it's getting dark.
How big?
I think if it would have probably stood up, it would have been 12 or 14 feet tall because it was 2 or 3 sizes bigger than the other ones that I saw, and taller. The shoulders and the head alone were big.
I have heard the Alaskan Sasquatches are bigger. I've heard stories of giants, the giants. They don't call them Sasquatches, they call them giants. And they live on the other side of Lake Iliamna. I've heard all kinds of weird rumors. And in drawing and listening to different eyewitnesses, it was very obvious to me off the bat that these things are different. Some are tall and skinny, some are kind of more big, classic, you know, hulking figures, some are scrawny. You know, overall, I think they're individuals. I don't know if there are different types, like there are black bear, you know, brown bear, you know, I'm thinking maybe something similar to that, depending on the environment they're in. I've heard people, you know, describe them with canines and without canines, and I tell you what, I've heard them from my witnesses more no canines, just like horse teeth. That's generally what I hear. Also, it makes me curious, are there different kinds that have different features that have evolved with their environment? Maybe they are bigger in Alaska because there's just a plethora of food around.
There's this thing called Bergmann's rule. Bergmann's rule is a rule in biology that basically states that the further away from the equator an animal lives, even within the same species, they get bigger. But what that really translates to is animals that live in cold places are large. And that has to do with heat retention. If you graph mass versus surface area, if you make a math graph, you know, and plot how mass goes up, and then compare that to how surface area goes up. The mass of a mammal is what creates the body heat. That body heat can only be radiated out to the environment through its surface area, right? Makes sense. So if the mass is increasing faster than the surface area is on the graph, well, then more heat is retained within the animal. And that's why black bears, for example, in Alaska are bigger than the black bears in Mexico, because they live in colder environments. And Sasquatches, which are already very large animals and already covered in hair, I think they tend to be a little larger up there. They follow the same biological rules as all the other species do.
So it was, let's see, about the beginning of the winter, this last winter. I was out scouting a place to cut wood. I had heard about this trail behind the airport here about a mile away, and I drove back probably 200 or 300 yards, and I had actually gotten stuck. There's a place where the water runs down off the mountain and crosses the trail and kind of made it a little swampy area. And the snow, it was the first snow, so there was a little bit of snow on the ground. I didn't realize that I drove out onto it, the swamp, and I got stuck. So I had gotten out, so I cut down some wood and was picking my truck up out of the swamp so I could get out. And actually a brown bear walked up on me, walked up right behind me. And it spooked me because I didn't even hear him, the bear did. And so I got into the truck, and I was going to wait him out until he just decided to walk off. So I took a little bit of a nap. I guess it was probably about an hour and a half. Well, it was starting to get dark. The sun was starting to go down. The bear was still around. I noticed that he looked up and looked around and took off. Well, about 15 or 20 minutes later, I'm still sitting in my truck to make sure he went away. And I noticed something, I don't know, maybe it was 20 yards away, like kind of in the trees moving around. And at first I thought it was just a person or something, but it was all white. I just decided, well, I'm gonna get out and try to get out again. By then the sun's already going down really good, and I have a couple of flashlights on, and I got my headlights on. And there's some trees probably about that far ahead of me. And I noticed that now whatever it was, it's kind of over behind the trees, and it looks a lot bigger. I would say it's like 12 feet tall, maybe 14 feet, because I seen the top of its head above the trees, like just barely above the trees. So I'm like, man, this is not right. So I get back in my truck, and by then I'm really spooked. You know, the hair on the back of my neck's standing, and I'm kind of scared. I don't have a gun with me because I don't carry one. And so I'm just sitting there for a little while. It disappears. I see it again, and now it's off to the left, kind of. It's still on the trail, but behind the trees where they're kind of closing in at the end. I get like a better view of it because he's standing there and my headlights are on him. And he's definitely like 12 to 14 feet tall. He was pretty wide, and he was white, and he had like a round looking head. It wasn't long like you see pictures of him or whatever. I could see his eyes, they were big, and he was just staring right at me. He hung out all night. Like right around there, he would move around behind me, but mostly in front of the vehicle, where I could kind of see him, but kind of not. I don't know why he hung out there. I would take a nap for a little while and wake back up, and he'd still be around. I'd get out of the truck for a second, and I could hear him moving. But I felt like I shouldn't be there.
We talked to a witness while we were there who said he'd seen a white Bigfoot over that way twice. Have you ever heard any other accounts of white Bigfoot?
My theory is they're marked hominid kind of a thing. So it's not really like piebald, but you'll have all black with like a little patch or something like this, different coloration. So when I hear the stuff like the albino type or white or gray or something, that really perks my interest because that's what my research is leading to that. I call it a boreal Sasquatch because it's a northern Sasquatch, still a Sasquatch, but your regular Sasquatch is your Pacific Northwest. They marked hominid, and I say marked because they have the different coloration, and then on the chest and in their face they'll have some different, a gray maybe for age and things like that. And that's just my theory. That's what I'm finding because of all the reports when I comb all those things and I try to sort them out by age, you know. There's the age, of course, but then you look at the descriptors and things like this, and they're coming back. To me, they're coming back with markings and size differences.
Creature descriptions in Alaska run the gamut, from massive towering figures nearly 12 feet tall to tiny hair-covered beings that clock in around 3 to 4 feet. Some witnesses recount seeing Sasquatch beings that are covered in a thick, rough fur, while others see something that has long, stringy, occasionally patchy hair. Eyeshine ranges from red to yellow to amber to green. The face is often remarked upon as being eerily similar to that of a human, while others have speculated that what they encountered was a relative of the great ape. Alaska's size does little to hold in check the theorizing that accompanies the Bigfoot topic, instead allowing those who wish to do so nearly limitless opportunity to let their imagination run wild. Races of giants are said to roam the mountains near Denali, while the wilderness is said to be inhabited by undiscovered tribes of beings bent on the destruction of anyone it comes in contact with. Here, the mighty yet elusive Sasquatch is just one member of a massive catalog of mythic figures. You're working off the theory that there would be basically two types in this area.
You've got neo-giants, which are the Sasquatch, and then the marked hominids, which I call the boreal Sasquatch because they're found subarctic, which is where we are. Mm-hmm. And this is the kind of track that they're leaving. This has got more rectangular shape to it, straight. Yeah. Where this had the other one, this could be classified as a boreal Sasquatch too. It's got the right latitude. Mm-hmm. It's got the right characteristics with that swooped insole.
What would be the biggest difference between the two? Other than, I mean, obviously, physically, the actual foot and the height.
They're probably the same.
Okay.
A black bear here is the same as a black bear in Oregon.
Yeah.
You know, there might be a little bit difference, you know, a few differences here and there, but they're still the same species, I think. Yeah. Or not enough is known to say it's a different species.
Right.
So,
have you casted or seen any casts from Alaska that kind of fit the boreal shape?
There was one outside of Fairbanks. It was kind of on the large side, but it had that swooped insole, so it's like that's easily a marked hominid, a real Sasquatch. And it, you know, there's your insole again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I see what you mean about how boxy they are.
You got that rectangular looking, and then this is, and then there's another one called a Neanderthaloid. That's got 4 toes, and it's supposed to be more caveman-like. And there's reports of that wearing clothing.
Okay, in Alaska?
Yes, here in Alaska.
Tool usage, that kind of thing.
Neanderthaloid.
Yeah.
Like Neanderthal man.
Yeah, like okay.
But only 4 toes.
Right.
And
so
the size we are, you know, 5 feet to 6 feet.
Where are those sightings taking place?
They're all over here in this area. When you get up north, it's more this thing, boreal Sasquatch, just because of the way the environment is in this area, especially down in, you know, next to the town. You could have Sasquatch and boreal Sasquatch. And then there's one called the Tussetan, and Tussetan is Athabascan. There's no word for the translation, but in English it means monkey people. And so these are kind of a 4 to 5 foot thing, and they have a tail. That's why it's the monkey thing. They like to live along rivers, and they're troublemakers. There's always tales of the Athabascans fighting these things for years and years. But
I'm just curious, at the boreal, would they be able to handle different climates better? Like colder climates maybe stick to the higher elevations?
They're at home here.
Yeah.
And at home in the valley.
Yeah.
Not so much here because, you know, what you got for food here, the food source. So they're going to take advantage of it, you know. But they're just as at home here, you know, on a glacier as they are in a muskeg or a bog.
Right.
If native peoples and eyewitnesses alike are actually describing multiple types or even species of upright hominids, then shouldn't there be more for us to go off of than the odd story? Aside from a few random footprint castings, my time in Alaska has been short of actual physical or audio-visual evidence for the presence of Sasquatch or any of the upright creatures said to inhabit the last frontier. Maybe that isn't so surprising given the sheer size of the state and the minimal amount of investigators and researchers willing to spend time in the frozen wastes and forests that make it up. While there are a growing number of those willing to put the hours into looking for Sasquatch, the amount of available material turned up through investigations is almost non-existent. However, I've been hearing for quite some time about a place not that far from Homer that seems to be our best bet for evidence of the creature's presence in the 49th state, and it happens to be geographically located fairly close to Port Chatham, which is one of the most infamous locations in the annals of Bigfoot research. While Port Chatham has been explored in depth already in numerous television and film projects, Area A has not. So while my crew and I are out talking to witnesses and exploring the vast regions of Alaska, Alexander Pedikov and Eli Watson head to Area A. Area A is the name given to a remote area of coastal Alaska with a history of very unusual activity. Area A is located on Alaska's rugged Kenai Peninsula, nestled between massive mountains on either side and the deep blue waters of the Gulf of Alaska with large glaciers nearby. Area A consists of a small cabin steeped in a lush, deep, and dark temperate rainforest. The cabin is owned by a man named Scott, who has experienced everything from rock throws and bizarre slaps on the side of his cabin walls to screams and possible visualizations of the creatures that seem to inhabit the forests. This is the same area of the Kenai Peninsula where survivor man Les Stroud described an experience with what sounded like a gorilla vocalizing and loud thumping.
As with most of Alaska, the chances are high that this could be the ideal place to find some answers to the question of unknown creatures in North America.
So about a year ago, April of 2021, I was contacted by a property owner in Alaska who had a remote property in the Kenai Peninsula, about an hour from the nearest town, and he claims to have over the years had experienced some very interesting possible Sasquatch activity. Never stated it was Sasquatch, but it was sort of alluded. So I created a relationship with him and became friends with him and was invited out to the property, and essentially we went out to the Kenai Peninsula for 8 days, spent it entirely at this property, researched it thoroughly, and had some pretty interesting stuff happen.
I met Scott 2.5 years ago. So I happened to be given a Bigfoot presentation out here at the Muskox farm. After the presentation, he came up to me and we introduced, we hit it off. I could tell he was a real, pretty serious guy. He was not screwing around. He was almost a little, I don't want to say nervous, but he was just bothered. It bothered him. And what intrigued me is he was not a Bigfoot person. He did not research Bigfoot. He couldn't tell you what, tree knock, not any of the activities that they're known for. But yet he's telling me all these things that are happening. And I'm like, that's classic Bigfoot stuff. The rock throwing especially. That's what really blew my mind. See, and he's witnessed the rocks being thrown.
We're talking, witnessing large boulders, as the property owner described to me at one point. They witnessed a boulder get thrown horizontally from a wooded area where there wasn't a huge hill, just right into the bay where they had their boat moored. Just a whole host of other things, lots of things being slapped at the cabin, wood knocks, hearing knocks. One of the first instances they had happen was hearing what they described as a T-Rex roar, and it was getting closer to them. The outhouse at one point the toilet was taken and thrown 30 feet into the woods. Probably the most dramatic one that I heard that was described as before the cabin was finished, their only entrance inside was basically the floorboards on the upper left-hand kind of corner of the cabin. So they would come in through that hole, work on the inside, and they would cover it with plywood and put a Yeti cooler, one of those big 60, 70-pound coolers on top just to keep things from getting in. It was before they had a staircase or anything to really get up. And one evening, that cooler was, something lifted that wood and that cooler flew 15 feet across the cabin, hit the other wall. They all started shouting bear. There were people sleeping in that room where the cooler was, and weapons were grabbed, and essentially they described hearing something running up the hill bipedally. So there had been essentially every time they went out there would be something going on, whether it be wood knocks, things being thrown, things being moved. One of the only visual encounters there was a gentleman going to use the outhouse at night, and upon coming out, while inside the outhouse, described a very odd feeling of being watched. It felt very uncomfortable. Walked outside and 15, 20 feet in the woods, saw this kind of hulking figure with glowing eyes, just sort of behind this wooden stump. And through measurements, they determined it was 6 or 7 feet kind of in that area. So there's just so many incidents that have happened there that I was told about, but then we of course experienced them ourselves as well.
What I had heard about the cabin before going out there was that I had obviously heard some of the sounds, like the baby crying. I think that's the one that really stuck out to me the most, but the long drawn out howl as well. I hadn't heard a lot of the stories. I hadn't been in contact with Scott himself, so it was all kind of through Alex. And I just knew that it was way off the grid, and there was a lot of stuff happening out there, that the NAWC had been out there. David Ellis had analyzed some of the audio from out there. And that's pretty much as far as I knew.
Yeah, so essentially I was given a bunch of audio files by the property owner, which had been analyzed by David Ellis of the Olympic Project. We're talking extremely long, drawn-out howls, that classic sort of echoing, bellowing, Bigfoot kind of howl. Knocks, wood knock, rock knock sort of stuff. And one of the creepiest ones was what sounds like a baby crying. The baby crying, I should add, this baby crying sound was only ever heard or recorded on or around the time women were present on the property. So that then takes you back to Alaskan native stories from centuries ago of don't go into the woods when you hear crying. There was sounds of things clearly hitting the cabin, whether it be rocks or slaps or something, purposefully smacking the side of cabin or the roof.
Well, Scott ended up telling me that there had been people there who had lived in that cove about 100 years ago. There was supposedly a schoolhouse, or what he thought might be a schoolhouse, was like this unknown cabin up there somewhere. Yeah, I guess those people moved out for whatever reason. No one's really there year-round anymore.
So the Kenai Peninsula is essentially the shoreline and the forests that surround it are rainforest. This is a temperate rainforest. So getting to this property in particular, you have to take a boat ride and go basically around a bunch of peninsulas and archipelagos of 2,000-foot mountains basically sticking out from the sea. Here you're on your own. You're at least a few hours from a town or hospital or anything like that. So the dangers of just getting out to a place like this can't be understated. It's absolutely a risk just going out there.
The first summer I go out there was 2 years ago. It was June, beautiful weather out there. There were 4 of us, and the first night I decided I want to stay up late. The other 3 gentlemen went to bed maybe 10:30. So 10:30, 11:30, quiet, nothing. And I admit my expectations were pretty high. Being that I've been telling and told all these stories, I've heard the recordings, I'm jacked. I'm like, come on, man. And nothing, it's just quiet. And I'm like, of course, so I got braver as the evening wore on. So then I moved down to the beach. I've been out there for about 3 hours at this point. Just out of the blue, it sounded like the biggest dude took a tree limb, not like a baseball bat, but like I could tell it was big. Crack! I mean, right in front of me, about maybe 30 feet in the tree line. And it was loud. It just broke just shattered the silence. And I knew what I heard, but I think it was still registering. And then it did it again. Crack! So hard, I could hear the stuff falling off the trees, the pine needles and whatnot. And after that second one, the fear, it's like I wasn't expecting that. I looked over at the cabin, which is about 100 feet to my left, and it's kind of dark, nestled in the woods a little, and the big creepy trails next to it. And I just had to get to safety. I ran to the cabin. Well, I didn't run, I walked really fast. And I think I walked fast because I felt if I ran, I would get more scared. But I walked really fast, and what I didn't know is Scott had walked out on the deck of the cabin and he was relieving himself when the tree knocks happened. So he heard them. And I still had the thermal in my hand. I come walking, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that. He's like, that's Bush League, man. That's Bush League. Because Scott's heard it all out there. So that was my first night and first encounter there.
Hey dude, it's Alex. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This is via the sat phone. Just thought I'd check in and see what you guys are up to. I think tomorrow's our last full day, so we're out on the 15th, so we'll see you guys up in Bigfoot Art Gallery. But yeah, it's been pretty awesome out here. Some weird activity for sure. Like last night we had shit running around our camp and throwing stuff and shit into the water. It was definitely weird. Definitely some crazy stuff out here, but yeah, man, we'll tell you all about it when we're back. Just thought I'd check in and hope you guys are having a good time, and see you soon.
What did you guys actually experience?
So one of the things I experienced that actually was kind of a recurring theme was hearing a mystery gunshot. I happened to walk outside after waking up. I hear what sounds like a gunshot come from behind me on the left, very distant. again, you'd know if someone was there. I mean, this is you're on a bay. You see boats coming in, and very rarely do we see anyone out there. Upon talking to the property owner, he says, yeah, there's nobody out here shooting. We hear this kind of stuff, sort of power knock kind of thing.
One of the nights we camped up out on this ridge that was just behind the cabin. No one had ever camped out there before, except for me, Alex, and Ron. And we were hearing all sorts of activity. I mean, walking around us on both sides, left and right, as well as knocks, close and far. But a bear's not gonna do that. You know, a moose is not gonna do that. So, what it felt like was that something was coming in and checking us out. And I don't know how to explain it other than that.
Hey, what's going on, man? Just checking in here. We've had a pretty exciting couple days. Very clear wood knock, rock throwing incidents. It's been pretty wild, but we just came across what looks like a handprint on the back of the cabin. It's a metal siding. It's very, it's 50-50, either a human or something human-like. It's not misidentified bear, mountain goat, or anything like that. It's clearly got dramatic lithics, those dermal ridges. It's a handprint. I don't know what, but it's the only one like it across the cabin. So just figured to let you know. Hopefully you're getting this message loud and clear. But we'll talk more when we see you, because this is pretty exciting. So hopefully you can turn something out with this.
How's that? Yeah, you can see it's about 8.
But upon returning from the woods, I found a large, very unusual looking handprint on the back of the cabin. So we have since lifted the print or parts of it and collected a sample and have some folks looking at it. None of us could replicate it. That's what was so interesting about it. And people that have looked at it, including David Ellis and others, have been very intrigued by it, especially the lack of the thumb. Something that I've been told in alleged Sasquatch handprints is that the thumb, for some reason, is usually not visible. So that was one of the most intriguing things we found. Is it conclusive? Of course not. I mean, will we know? Maybe we'll know a little bit more about it, but it's a very, very interesting property. I think at one point it was probably the most active property in North America in terms of alleged Sasquatch activity.
The handprint has since been examined by 2 professors of anthropology that specialize in primate dermatoglyphics. One concluded it was likely human with prominent dermals visible due to heavy labor like wood chopping, working machinery, etc. The second professor found them intriguing, first concluding it was some kind of bear, but upon closer inspection said that dermatoglyphics were visible but did not comment further. The sounds recorded at Area A are likewise being analyzed by audio experts. So far, the results are impressive. So there is some sort of evidence that Sasquatch might roam the last frontier, and I've heard more than enough intriguing eyewitness accounts to convince me that people are seeing something here. I'm just not sure if the habitat and expansiveness of the region will allow for the eventual discovery of the culprit.
Scott's area, those beings knew they were there long before Scott and his friends knew that they were there. They were curious. And then they started making themselves known through vocalizations or slaps on the cabin or, rocks being thrown or whatever the case might have been. So could that have been the initiation of some type of process? Maybe. But I really think you'd have to commit to a long-term expedition, living, pretty harshly in harsh environments through all 4 seasons to really get some groundbreaking new evidence.
I've always been firmly in the it's a great ape camp. There seems to be some sort of mode of vocal communication. What I find uncanny is its ability to hide, because they were all around us out in the cabin. It felt like they were all around us, but where were they? I'm so confused. Like, where did they go? Where did they hide?
I don't know what they do. I just don't. Who knows what they do? I don't think they're gonna walk up and shake my hand. You know, I've heard that if they come to you, that's bad, like what's happening out in Scott's cabin out there, which they seem to come to us. You know, I've never studied one, but I'd like to treat them like bears. I just keep a distance. I'm intrigued. I've heard some stuff out there that I've never heard in my life. I don't know what they'll do. I just don't know what they'll do. I think they'd probably leave you alone, but maybe one's having a bad day. You know, I don't know. You hear about all these missing people. I don't know, makes you wonder.
And the question always comes up, where's the body? You know, where's the body? Where's the proof? Where are the bones? Where, you know, okay, well, witness statements, hair samples, tracks. If you took the mountains of evidence from the past several decades and compiled it all and could convince an attorney to present a case before a court, could you convince a jury to return a verdict that would say this species exists? I think there's enough. There's just so much evidence out there. I think that, in my opinion, I think people have been convicted of crimes with far less evidence than the evidence that's been compiled over the past several decades on this subject.
The subject of Sasquatch is just so intriguing to me because of the mystery in it, because of the quirkiness about it too. I do kind of like that. Sasquatches are certainly in Alaska, and they're certainly walking around, and they certainly occasionally leave footprints wherever they go. They're going to be discovered eventually. They're absolutely real animals. They're absolutely real. And therefore, some scared hunter will pull a trigger someday, or a logging truck will run one over on the way to work. But the mystery will be gone. Sasquatches will still be there, and the mystery will be gone.
If it was as simple as knowing where to look, we'd have put this whole Bigfoot thing to rest long ago. During the late 1800s, an American prospector traveling along the Klondike River discovered gold lining its banks. Thus, the gold rush began. Over the next 12 years, thousands of ordinary men and women came to the Yukon in search of a better life, or simply the means to it. They traveled into a harsh territory with brutal weather, some of the largest predatory animals on Earth, and a landscape not yet mapped. Some of them struck it rich, while many more did not. They found themselves constantly on the brink of a new discovery here in the last frontier. Whether the discovery was simply gold, or to seek out if they had the wherewithal to survive in the land of the midnight sun. It reminds me of the earliest pioneers in the field of Sasquatch. The question of whether or not an unknown creature like Sasquatch actually exists remains, and like Alaska itself, the field of Bigfoot research is the last frontier of its own. A frontier full of charlatans and hidden agendas. A frontier full of normal, ordinary, everyday people who have encountered something extraordinary. A frontier of study for those willing to chase the great unknown.